Actually starting, with Jenny. Welcome, Jenny, from Te Whare Roimata.
Thank you. Our comments today are going to relate to the location of the Inner City East and the Linwood West neighbourhoods in relation to the representational review and where it fits in terms of the wards. The proposed central ward, we believe, imposes an arbitrary boundary through the neighbourhoods of the Inner City East and the Linwood West area, which bears no relationship to the existing geographical community or to an understanding of this unique area. We're arguing you need to see it together, not split. The area is one of the older communities of Christchurch, and since World War II has been one of the poorest parts of the city. And we refer you to some of the demographics that we cite, and we also say it's an area that differs markedly from the suburbs. If this proposal goes ahead, the result will be to carve up and separate out this community, making it much harder for its needs to be met, as this will force the people and the organisations with a focus on these neighbourhoods to have to relate to two community boards. Given the makeup of the proposed community boards, we can't help but see that they will have differing priorities, which will further disadvantage this already marginalised area. Of concern then is that the more powerful, better organised parts of the central ward will unintentionally dominate, rendering the Inner City East invisible. We see that this is already evident in the material that has been put out for this consultation. We note no mention has been made of the Inner City East when listing the neighbourhoods that make up the central ward, while others are clearly labelled. We also argue that all the sound work that has been done by the Hagley-Ferrymead community boards over many years will be undone with the carving up of this community. Included in this is concern that the issues of marginalisation and hardship, characteristics of living in this area, will be buried in the more affluent areas that make up the central Papanui Marshlands Community Board. In terms of connectivity, we also note that when Richmond and Phillipstown schools were closing, a number of the children from those children came to Christchurch East. We use this to highlight that this was largely driven by the interlinkages that exist between those these neighbourhoods. And we also comment that Christchurch East Primary School is named Christchurch East because it focuses towards the east, not across to the northwest. The Linwood ward, we are also concerned that the combining of Linwood, Burwood and the coastal ward into one community board will result in this board being heavily burdened by the issues of hardship, flooding and coastal hazards. Once again, the unique issues of Linwood West and the greater Linwood area will be subsumed by important debates over natural hazards. We also suggest that the pairing of Linwood and the other two wards bears little natural connection. Instead, we believe there is a stronger and better fit between Linwood and Woolston. So in light of our concerns, we suggest the following. Split the Linwood-Burwood coastal wards, given the complex issues this board has to grapple with, and also because we say of their unnatural fit. Put the Linwood ward together with a reconfigured Woolston ward, uncouple parts of St Albans from the central ward, then link the central ward with Linwood, and add a reconfigured Woolston to form a community board made up of central, Linwood and the reconfigured Woolston. If you do nothing else, shift the Linwood ward boundary west to ensure that the Inner City East community is not arbitrarily cut off from itself in terms of from the centre to Linwood. We say extend so that we make one Linwood area that at least incorporates the Inner City East with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Are there any questions? Yep, Pauline and then Phil.
Thanks, Jenny. And you made no comment on the number of councillors and
No,
wards?
we haven't.
Okay, thank you.
Phil and then Tim.
Thank you, Jenny, because that's really helpful, because I think the bit that Council are grappling with, and we did this yesterday, is actually looking at where the communities of interest are going to fit within the new wards and community boards. So just to clarify, your suggestion in terms of the way, and I acknowledge your long-standing involvement in the inner city and your understanding of that. So is that parts of that St Albans central area, in terms of a ward and community boards, could be included with Woolston and Linwood?
Yes.
Right. That's really helpful. Now, just say some other people come to us later and say, look, we in the further north, in terms of that sort of Papanui marshland part, that they might see themselves as sort of aligned with the central St Albans bit too. What would you say about that? I want your comment about that.
Okay, so I guess I have an interesting situation. I live in Whare and I work in the inner city east. So I have an understanding, and I've lived in St Albans for over 30 years. So I have an understanding of the St Albans area, and I have an understanding of the inner city east Linwood area. As a St Albans resident, I don't connect with the central area in what I think is being portrayed. I connect with things like St Albans Primary School, with Shirley, with Papanui. With Papanui High School, there's a much greater linkage in and around that, like the old board at the moment, than looking down into, as for where I live, living down into the inner city east. There doesn't seem to be any real connection.
Thank you, Jenny. That's very helpful.
Okay, thanks. Tim was next, then Glenn.
You mentioned about maybe moving the line on the map from, did you mean from, say, Fitzgerald Ave across to something like Stanmore Road? Or I
would go back to somewhere like Madras Street.
I'll take it the other way.
Go back to town, because that's the traditional boarding house, the old inner city that goes down to Linwood Avenue,
so
traditionally.
Rather than Barbados, so right across from Madras. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Glenn.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. All that work you've been doing on inner city housing, which you've identified as a particular kind of not only geographic but social sort of constituency, what would this proposal do to that?
It would separate out the communities, and I think, like, if you were trying to advocate that, I can't help but say there's a whole connectedness down to Linwood Avenue. A lot of poor single people living in single accommodation, that tends to be in that area, historically has been there. You're separating it off, and you're meaning that two boards have now got to deal with that problem. And I suspect with the issues that you've got, if you do that Linwood, Burwood coastal one, understandably you've got huge issues there. The inner city east is just going, those issues are going to be small in comparison and quickly become invisible.
I think you said one board has the history of dealing with that.
Yes, they do.
It would be new work for another board, though.
Yes, okay. And you'd have to start again educating. And Hagley Ferrymead Ward is the councillors and the community board are really in tune with that.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Could I just ask one more too, Jenny? So you mentioned that Beeley Ave you see as a natural boundary. So is that where you would want to put the boundary for the...
I guess I'm being willing to compromise, but I would imagine it's Beeley Avenue because it's part of the part of the four avenues, I guess. You've got your figures that you've got to look at, and I suppose that I'm trying to compromise a little bit around that, and so most probably it would be Beeley Avenue would be the ideal.
And then across, as you suggested, to Madras.
Yes.
And that would be
yes, indeed.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yanni.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your submission. Some submitters have said that we should just elect councillors across 3 wards. So, for example, if you took, the proposed community board boundaries, there should just be three councillors elected at large. I was just interested whether you had any comment around the issue of having local councillors representing local wards versus having more councillors spread across a wider geographic area, particularly with some of the areas that you've talked about in your submission, in terms of the inner city east, in terms of things like voter turnout, and whether that should be any concern.
Well, I think one of the reasons for the low voter turnout in that area is a sense of disenfranchisement. I think if you had a councillor that's really interested, and you have been one, Yanni, and others have been, in the inner city east area and been willing to promote some of those issues, it could well be advantaged to have someone that does obviously represent that view, or that ward. Certainly there is that. But then if you've got someone that doesn't necessarily pick up, I mean, the central ward is an interesting one, isn't it? Because you've got some very affluent areas, you've got some business part, and then you've got some of the poorer areas. I imagine you're more likely to get someone that's going to represent more of the other viewpoint. So it could be that the other, having, across the board is a better option, who picks up some of those out of interest.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming along and making those points.